Bum 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 bum. The Peter Mix Show. Bum 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 bum. So I want to update you guys on my recent mental health saga, if you will. What had happened is that I live in Apache Junction right now. I teach at a local community college. It's not that far a drive away. But lately, due to some personal relationship turbulence, I have not been able to focus very much. I had half a dozen or so near miss car accidents in the space of just a week or two, to the point that I felt like that's it. I had to give up the driving. And I decided that it would be a great opportunity to talk to a colleague or two about the possibility that they could help me out. Right. After all, a lot of times, in times past, I haven't done it here at Central Arizona College, but in times past, I've helped colleagues who had family issues, right? I had a colleague who was going through chemotherapy. I had another colleague who had her sister had long COVID. She wanted to take care of her kids. And then I had a colleague who had a pregnancy complication. And for some reason, not don't get me wrong; those are very worthy things to help a colleague out with. But unfortunately, a lot of times people relate to various things more so than other things that are just as difficult, but not personally relatable, right? I think most of us can relate to a friend or family member who has gone through any of those three things, right? But heartbreak tends to be more of a closeted item, right? That's the thing, which is unfortunate because I have the good sense to stop driving. Other people who are going through heartbreak probably continue to drive anyway. And instead of hearing about a heartbreak, you see a nightly news event where there's been a 10-car pileup instead, right? You don't know what contributed to that 10-car pileup. It could have been just a heartbreak, just like my situation today, right? You'll never hear on the news there's been a 10-car pileup because some guy in his 30s has been having difficulty with dating and he's been hiding out in his work and doesn't have any friends, so he drives to work. You're probably not going to hear that on the news, right? You're not going to hear that. You might hear on the news that there's been some road rage and as a result there's been an accident. You're not going to hear that leading up to the road rage was some guy who was lonely and he needed to go to work anyway, right? You're not going to hear. You might hear on the news that I'm trying to think what else could come up. You might hear on the news that there's been a overdose or maybe an eating disorder, an obesity crisis. And you're not going to what you might not hear is that a good 10, 20, 30% of the people who died of the obesity or the overdoses or whatever it had its origin in heartbreak, right? So at least I had the decency to give up the car keys, right? Let's put it that way. And I'm very pleased with myself for doing that. Unfortunately, I went to the office and talked to two colleagues that I thought I could trust. Well, I do trust them. And to their credit, neither of them laughed me out. They listened to me. But the end conclusion was that they didn't have the time, they couldn't coordinate things. You know what? I remember when I helped my colleague who had the pregnancy complications, the COVIDs, the chemotherapies. They weren't exactly all that convenient either. I had a colleague who had a home repair emergency. Her pipe had burst in their home. I was teaching at Wash Tech at the time. The phone had rang at 8 o'clock in the morning. I was living in my car at the time. I was driving a Mitsubishi Lancer. I was living in my car. The phone had rang. I picked it up at 8 o'clock in the morning. This is, if I remember correctly, just before Thanksgiving. It was freezing in the morning, and I picked up the phone, and my colleague explained that they're working on house repairs and all that, and it's 8 o'clock. And by the time I'd start my car and get myself warmed up, because it was probably 30 some degrees out there, there was no time to really go to the gym to take a shower or anything like that. I had a gym membership for my showers because I had to go to the campus to read up on the material first, right? This is a different class than the one I was teaching. It was nice. I got to see a different cohort of students. That's not the end of the world. Now, when I finished that class and I walked out of the classroom, only then did it occur to me what I just did. I was living out of my car. I had a colleague who owned a house in Bellevue, Washington. You know, they start at $2 million a piece, right? And I'm the one to help her? Really? What I should have done was called her after class and say, you know what? I actually live out of my car. In return for this favor, can I stay in your in a spare bedroom in your house, like for at least a couple of nights, to, in return? I really should have done that. It probably wouldn't go very well in our society. And you know what? I didn't really need that. So I didn't ask for that. But it goes to show that there's a big difference between I really can't do it because it's logically impossible versus it's too difficult for me, therefore I can't do it, right? I think in a lot of cases today when I asked for the rides, I think it was the latter case, right? It wasn't a physical impossibility. These people owned a car. They had a seat in the car, right? It's not like me. I probably would have a hard time giving somebody a ride because I have so much clutter in my car, right? Like art projects and all that. If somebody asked me, but you know what? If a colleague really were running into trouble, I'd probably stop off at the storage unit and toss all my shit in there and help out my colleague, right? So it's not physically impossible. It's a barrier for sure, right? But a lot of my colleagues, and I've come to realize here in the United States, we have a very low tolerance for barrier, right? If you need to climb 2 feet, forget it, right? And so I'm going to have to think about that the next time my colleagues ask me to help, right? And at least try to get something in return, right? The problem with getting something in return is that people are very generous at promising future return favors, but when it comes to the future, delivering it is a whole different story, right? So that could be tricky too, right? After all, when I was teaching at WashTech, a lot of times I helped my colleagues with the understanding that they would match me up with a girl when times were better, right? Because this was during COVID, and the reality is that never happened, right? So it's hard to say. All right, but a life lesson today. It wasn't the end of the world. After all, none of these people laughed at me. They empathized with me. But when it came to a return favor, they had a very low tolerance for any sort of inconvenience. And I learned that maybe I should have a low tolerance for that going forward as well, right? When I picked up the phone at 8 a.m., I should have said that, you know what? I just woke up. I don't think this would look right to our students, right? Maybe just tell the students that you'll reschedule class. That's probably a better idea. That way we can have a good image with the students, right? I should have said that, right? Maybe I didn't want to admit to her that I was living in my car, but I could have said that at least, right? This is the Peter Mixbag Show. Bum 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 bum. The Peter Mixbag Show. Bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. The Peter Mixbag Show. Bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. The Peter Mixbag Show. Bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. The Peter Mixbag Show. Bum 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 bum.